Hello, my beautiful boring people. My name is Victoria, and this is my NEWTs reading wrap-up video. It's not my August wrap-up because I read a lot more books than what's on this list, but let's just stick with this for now, shall we? So, if you haven't already watched my first video where I introduced like the NEWTs and which track I was doing, I'll fill you in. I decided to go for Metal Charmer, and I played for House Gryffindor, of course, because your girl is a basic bitch and she's stereotypical. So I'm a Gryffindor, even though I just retook the Pottermore test to try to get Ravenclaw, because I'm really a Gryffindor, let's be real. But every time, never fails, no matter what test I take, Gryffindor every time. Shame on me. Anyways, I read 12 books for this readathon, which included around 5,378 pages. I'm pretty happy with that. And for part of this, I read a series. You may recognize it as the Percy Jackson series. It's the first time I've read it, and I loved it. But I won't get into talking about what that series is if you haven't heard of it until later on. So don't worry, I'll fill you in on the Percy Jackson books, but I'm only going to give you hints as to what the series is about in the first one, which comes later down in this list. Alright, so let's start with Arithmancy. To get my acceptable in Arithmancy, I read The Sea of Monsters, which is a Rick Riordan book, which is part of the Percy Jackson series. And the challenge for the acceptable in Arithmancy was to read a book that ends on an even page number, and this book has 288 pages, and I finished it on the 11th and gave it 5 stars. I really liked most of the Percy Jackson series, and I will definitely be rereading it, so that's why it gets 5 stars. Is it like an absolutely groundbreaking book? Depends on who you ask for that one, but I really enjoyed it. I'm definitely gonna reread it. I loved it. Next, for exceeds expectations, I chose Wilder Girls by Rory Power, and this challenge was to read a standalone book. I will be doing a review for this book separately in a later video, probably in early September, so stay tuned for that. For a really super quick synopsis, it involves LGBTQ+ relationships, stars, mostly female cast, and they're stuck on an island where the tox happens. Some people are growing second eyelids, some people are growing second spines. It's a really weird tox thing. And one of the girls at this girl's boarding school goes missing, and another one of them goes after her to find her best friend, because she's like, man, we've lost too many people to the tox. I'm gonna go find you before you die. And I'm gonna leave it there. I finished it on the 12th. It has 353 pages, and overall I gave it 4 stars because the rereadability for it isn't too high for me, but it was pretty solid for someone who likes Poe and a lot of prose and just dark, creepy weirdness. Next, for an outstanding in Arithmancy, the challenge was to read a book that is longer than 350 pages, and for this I chose a book which was 367 pages that I finished on the 12th, which was The Battle of the Labyrinth, which is again part of the Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan. Stay tuned later for more info on that. And I gave it 4 stars. As the series goes on, I still really enjoyed it, but I didn't necessarily feel like the last couple of books were as strong as the first few. For charms, for an acceptable, the challenge was to read a book that I thought had a gorgeous cover. For this, I chose Aurora Rising by J. Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. It was 473 pages, and I finished it on the 14th. I gave this book 5 stars because I was really feeling like reading some strong tropes that are so strong that it's like that in and of itself, with the way that the characters are written, almost feels like a satire. So the whole thing feels like a satire, but it still goes places and does stuff. It's nothing brand new. I made a whole video talking about this. I really enjoyed it, but it's not everybody's cup of tea. I'll link that video down below if you want my full review. Next we have The Tales of Beedle the Bard by J.K. Rowling, and I chose this one for my Exceeds Expectation in Charms, where the challenge was to read a comic, graphic novel, manga, or a book under 150 pages. This book only has 128 pages, and I finished it on the 22nd. I gave it 4 stars. For those of you who don't know what The Tales of Beedle the Bard is, it's part of the world building for the Harry Potter world, universe, whatever you want to call it. And it's a collection of short stories that witches and wizards would tell to their children as like bedtime stories, or warning you of, if you do this, bad things will happen. It's basically fairy tales for witches and wizards. And like most anthologies, I enjoy some stories. I don't enjoy other stories as much. So 4 stars overall for me. Alright, next we have The Titan's Curse by Rick Riordan, another book in the Percy Jackson series, which I read for an outstanding in Charms, where the prompt was to cast the spell Spongify and read a paperback book. Now for these, I was reading mostly from library books, and most library books are hardbound, but I thought, to meet this, you know what? I'll check out a soft copy because it's an ebook. So I went for an ebook on this route. Anyways, it had 328 pages. I finished it on the 12th as well, and I gave it 5 stars. Next we have You Do You, Proud to Be Fabulous by Tan France and Nikki Levy, which was an Audible only production, so it doesn't actually have a page count. But I read this for an Acceptable in Transfiguration, which the prompt was to read a book with LGBTQ plus representation in it. Which, I mean, it's Tan France and Nikki Levy. And it's You Do You, Proud to Be Fabulous. It screams gay. Of course it is. It's wonderful. It's kind of an anthology in a way, because it's a group of short stories told from a few different people, covering different aspects of their lives and how being gay affects them and all that jazz. And the short stories themselves were really good, but, and this is unusual, I didn't like the narration from Nikki and Tan, because I don't know, it felt rushed, or that maybe Nikki and Tan just weren't getting along. That's what it came across when I was listening to it. That may not be the case. But I don't know whether it was just that it was rushed, that someone just didn't know how to stitch together the stories in between, you know, from story to story. It wasn't stitched well together. It felt like, oh, here's this random story about being gay, and here's another random story about being gay. And there wasn't a smooth, fluid transition between those two. And I don't know. I feel like it could be really good, but they need to go back to the drawing board a little bit on it. Because of the stories that are in it itself, I gave it 4 stars because it was really cool to hear some of that stuff. But it was almost a 3-star because of how weird the narration in between was. Next we have Lord of Chaos by Robert Jordan, which is a continuation in the Wheel of Time series. It's actually book 6. I read this for my Exceeds Expectation in Transfiguration, where the prompt was to read a book that was not first in its series. I mean, this did the job. I'm slowly getting through the Wheel of Time. I'm doing about 1 a month so far, doing the audiobooks for them with Michael Kramer and Kate Redding, and they are absolutely fantastic narrators. And there were actually points where, because of the way that Michael Kramer read the voices, I was rolling, and I actually tweeted it to him, and he answered back, and I was like, my favorite narrator just liked my tweet. What? Does anybody else do that? Please let me know in the comments. I mean, I know I'm weird, but am I that weird? Anyways, the print version of The Lord of Chaos contains 1,011 pages. It's a lot. I think it's about 40-ish hours if you listen to it on regular speed, which I never do because I don't read at regular speed. I read at least 2 times speed, and I can listen at about 2 times speed or more, depending on what I'm doing and what I'm concentrating on. Audiobooks are great when you're doing dishes and laundry and cooking and just all the chores. Love it. I gave this book 5 stars again because I just really like the Wheel of Time series. I like the world building. I like the pace of it, even though sometimes it can get slightly annoying. But I can totally tell that this is going to be at least a classic for me, and I'm going to plan to reread it over and over and over again because there are so many details in this that you'll get a new piece of the story every time you reread it just because there's just so much. Next book, we have The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I already made a video about this, so I will link that down below as well. I read this for my Outstanding in Transfiguration, where the prompt was to read a book over 500 pages. This book has 848 pages, 804 of which are main story. The last few pages are like it's not a thesaurus, what's it called? Glossary. That's the word I was looking for. Glossary. But the last pages of this book are a glossary and a list of cast and characters and more details about them. I'm not going to go into it because I already talked about it in that video. I gave this book 3 stars. Yeah. Next we have The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan, the first book in the Percy Jackson series, and now I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. But first, I read this for an acceptable in Ancient Runes, where the challenge was to read a book recommended by a friend. And my friend Dylan recommended this to me. We've been friends since I was in 7th grade, he was in 8th grade, and his cousin is now my husband. So we go back, and now we family. So when he was like, you need to read this book, I was like, give it to me now. I need a recommendation to read anyways for this challenge. And ooh, it was a good one. I really enjoyed this. It is a middle grade level story about Percy. How many times can I talk about Percy Jackson in this video? And I'll just read you the blurb from the cover. Percy Jackson is a good kid, but he can't seem to focus on his schoolwork or control his temper. And lately, being away at boarding school is only getting worse. Percy could have sworn his pre-algebra teacher turned into a monster and tried to kill him. That's where it leaves off. That's it. That's all you get to know. Not really. I'll fill you in a little bit. Let's just say that this month for me was Greek mythology month. You kind of get an updated version of the Greek myths and what's going on in the real world now. It's a really interesting take on it. I found the series to be highly engaging, especially in the first 3 books, and I gave this book 5 stars because I totally plan to reread this. It was so engaging and fun, and just, if you like fantasy and you like Greek myths and you like stuff that's set in the real world, but the real world's got a fantasy twist on it that isn't too heavy, because I'm talking Greek myth style fantasy, not like sci-fi fantasy, you're gonna love it. Go read it if you haven't, and that sounds like it's a good thing to you. It's a great series. I refuse to watch the video because I've heard so many terrible, terrible things about the movie. I'm terrified to watch it now, and I don't want it to ruin the books for me, so I don't know that I ever will watch it unless someone decides to challenge me and is like, you know what, we're gonna read Percy Jackson and watch the movies. It's gonna be terrible but wonderful. Maybe only then. Next book, we have Dollar's Book of Greek Myths by Ingrid Dallaire, and I read this for an Exceeds Expectations in Ancient Runes, where the challenge was to read a book written in past tense. Now, it's a book about Greek mythology. It's written from the point of view where you could almost use it for bedtime stories. I've done a whole video on this book already. I will link it below as well. But I mean, you're talking about the gods did blah blah blah. So I'm gonna say that that counts. Like, some people, I don't know. What do you guys think when somebody says past tense? Because when I hear past tense, I think active passive voice, because just writing in past tense for the sake of past tense can get really annoying and becomes very boring. And in high school, I had a history teacher who made us write a history paper in active passive voice. And it was the hardest thing I had ever done at the time, but it greatly improved my writing skills. And ever since then, I can't read things written in only, like, past. No, it's boring. Active passive. There you go. Anyways, this has 192 pages. It was glorious. I finished it on the 2nd. It was one of the first reads that I did because I've had this book forever. I had it in 7th grade. Watch the video down below. And finally, for the 12th book, we have The Weizmann Sphere by Patrick Rothfuss, which I read as my acceptable for Defense Against the Dark Arts, where the challenge was to read a book that was black under the dust cover. This is the 2nd book in the Kingkiller Chronicle. I gave it 4 stars because I liked the Name of the Wind a lot more. We still pick up where we left off, but it goes to a place that wasn't as enticing to me, but I'm still totally excited for the 3rd book in this series to finally come out, hopefully next year. It's been a 12-year wait, which I didn't have to do because I didn't find out about the Kingkiller Chronicle until this year, so hopefully it actually does come out next year and we get to enjoy that and see how we rate the series overall. But this book had 994 pages. She thick, she long, just like The Name of the Wind. It's a slow-paced story told from Kavoth's point of view of what happened in his life to get him to where he is now. And that concludes everything that I read for the NEWTs Readathon. Hooray! I'm a metal charmer now. Now excuse me while I go conceal who I am and what I make, because I'm a secret operative in the wizarding world now. Okay, bye!